The hum of fluorescent lights was the only applause I got in those years. Midnight in the warehouse, the air heavy with dust and diesel. I sat cross-legged on a concrete floor, scribbling delivery routes on the back of an old invoice. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, a missed call from some friend I hadn't spoken to in months, but I let it go dark. There was no room for distraction. At 24, I had a mattress pressed against a peeling wall, a truck with a failing alternator, and a business idea people laughed at, freight logistics in a city that barely noticed I existed. Banks said no. Partners backed out. The one driver who agreed to work with me quit after 2 weeks. So I drove, I lifted, I sorted. Dawn found me at truck stops brushing my teeth in grimy sinks, promising myself it would matter someday. And slowly it did. One client turned into 3. 3 into a dozen. A warehouse filled with cardboard became a network humming with movement. I learned to stretch $20 into a week's worth of fuel and noodles, then learned to read contracts like they were war maps. I built myself out of exhaustion and stubbornness, one invoice at a time. By the time I turned 30, the mattress was gone, replaced by a loft with tall windows. The same hands that used to haul crates now signed paychecks for 30 employees. People who once forgot my name now called me, "Sir?" And yet, even surrounded by noise, the nights stayed quiet. Too quiet. Success makes a fine companion, but it doesn't reach across the table. It was in one of those quiet stretches, early evening, lobby of a downtown office building, that I first noticed her. Kayla. She was perched at the reception desk with a book in her lap, the kind of paperback that had dogged pages and underlines like battle scars. When I approached, she closed it carefully, as though she didn't want to lose the moment she'd been holding. "You look like someone who reads invoices for fun," she said, eyes flicking toward the folder in my hand. I laughed, surprised. Most people saw a suit and a file and decided I wasn't worth joking with. She tilted her head, studying me like she was searching for a sketch beneath layers of paint. That small smile, half amused, half daring, lodged itself in a place I didn't know was still empty. I remember walking out of that building into the cold night, city lights buzzing above, the street smelling of roasted chestnuts from a vendor on the corner. For the first time in years, the hum inside me shifted. Logistics, contracts, warehouses, those were all movement. But this felt like a rival. I didn't know it yet, but the same stubbornness that kept me alive in the grind would tether me to her. And it would be that tether I'd one day have to cut. Kayla didn't enter my life with fanfare. She drifted in like a song you didn't know you knew until you caught yourself humming it. After that first exchange in the lobby, we kept crossing paths. Her desk stacked with museum brochures and art magazines, mine piled with ledgers and schedules. It was almost comical. She spent her breaks sketching outlines of gallery spaces while I answered calls about missing pallets of concrete. 2 worlds that should have remained parallel, yet she tilted hers until it brushed against mine. She asked questions no one else thought to ask. "Why logistics?" she said once, sipping coffee out of a chipped ceramic mug in the break room we had both wandered into. "Because I like when things end up where they belong," I answered. It came out sharper than I intended, but she smiled, like she had just uncovered a truth I didn't want to admit. Soon, conversation spilled past lobby walls. Dinner at hole-in-the-wall restaurants. Walks under street lamps where she carried herself like every building was a backdrop to her story. She had the kind of curiosity that turned waiting for a bus into an adventure. Her laugh cracked the armor I didn't realize I had welded around myself. I learned her dream wasn't just to work in a museum. She wanted to curate, to choose what stories hung on walls, to give forgotten artists a chance to be seen. It was an impossible dream, she admitted with a shrug, but her eyes betrayed the certainty of someone who had already pictured the gallery opening in detail. I found myself wanting to hand her that vision. Maybe because I understood what it meant to fight for something invisible to everyone else. Maybe because I wanted to be the man who said yes when the world told her no. So I became her yes. I paid for courses, for trips to exhibitions, for late-night ramen after long shifts when she was too tired to pretend her job was enough. I told myself it wasn't sacrifice. It was investment. In her. In us. And for a while, it was beautiful. We built a rhythm. My days were filled with contracts and deliveries. My nights with wine-stained sketches spread across the kitchen table as she explained the difference between Renaissance lighting and Impressionist shadows. I didn't understand half of it, but I understood her. That was enough. Still, there were moments, small, almost invisible, when a question nagged at me. Like the night I found an unopened bill shoved into a drawer because she didn't want to think about it. Or the time she teased me about how quickly I reached for the check, saying, "You love being in control, don't you?" She said it with a grin, but her eyes lingered on me in a way that didn't feel like a joke. I ignored the flickers. Love teaches you to. Besides, I had built my entire life on carrying weight others couldn't. Why should this be any different? What I didn't see then was how invisible strings had started to knot between us. What felt like love to me might have been something else entirely for her. It happened on a night that should have been perfect. Our second anniversary. I had booked a quiet corner table at a rooftop restaurant, the kind of place where the city stretched out like a glittering map below us. I had even bought her a necklace, a delicate silver chain with a pendant shaped like a brushstroke. I thought it was clever, personal, something she'd wear when she finally stood in a gallery surrounded by the art she loved. But Kayla was restless that night. Her eyes kept drifting to her phone, her wine untouched, her laugh thinner than usual. I kept asking if everything was all right, and she kept brushing it off with, "I'm just tired." When the dessert came, untouched like the wine, I realized I'd been carrying the whole evening the way I carried everything else. I reached into my pocket for the velvet box, but my hand froze halfway. For the first time, I wondered if giving more would only make the silence between us louder. We drove home in near silence. The box stayed unopened. She went straight to the bedroom while I lingered in the kitchen, staring at the skyline through the window. It felt like looking at a city I no longer belonged to. The next morning, my phone lit up with a message from her. Not even a call. Just a handful of words that ripped through everything we built. "I've found someone else. Please don't contact me again." I read it twice, 3 times, thinking maybe it was a cruel joke. But the words didn't change. There's no manual for how to handle that kind of rupture. My mind split in two. One side reeled, grief, anger, disbelief crashing in waves. The other side clicked into the same mode I used when a shipment collapsed or a client defaulted: cold, precise, unflinching. Logistics. Crisis management. Within an hour, I canceled the credit card she used. Within 2, the lease on her car was terminated. By noon, every joint account was closed. Not out of spite, but because I understood how fast a story can turn into liability. She wanted to cut me out of her life. Then the cut would be clean. Still, that night I sat on the edge of the bed, the unopened necklace box in my hand, the room thick with silence. I wanted to feel anger sharp enough to drown everything else, but what came instead was a hollow calm. The kind you get after a storm flattens a field and all that's left is dirt and sky. I told myself this was her choice, her loss, that I would move forward the way I always had, by turning the wound into fuel. But beneath the surface, something more unsettling took root, the suspicion that maybe I hadn't been her partner at all. Maybe I had only been her provider. And if that was true, then what we shared had never been love. It had been an arrangement waiting to collapse. A week passed before the knock came. Not a polite tap but a steady, deliberate pounding that echoed through the loft. When I opened the door, a man in a tailored suit introduced himself as Kayla's attorney. He carried a briefcase like it contained a verdict. "You've been served," he said, handing me a thick envelope. His tone was professional, detached, but his eyes flickered with something I recognized: judgment. Inside were papers filled with claims that felt like weapons dressed in legal jargon. Emotional distress. Financial control. Exploitation. Words so far removed from the nights we spent laughing over takeout that they read like someone else's life. At first I laughed. The absurdity of it. Me, the villain in a story I had written with sweat and sacrifice. But the laugh died quickly. Because once those words were on paper, they had weight. They could stain reputations, ruin businesses, unravel years of work. I called her. Straight to voicemail. I texted. No response. She had vanished into silence, leaving only the echo of her accusations. The next morning, whispers began. A client pulled out of a contract, pending clarification. A colleague asked carefully if everything was all right at home. The warehouse floor, once a space that smelled of coffee and diesel and possibility, now buzzed with a different energy, unease. That night, I met with my own lawyer. He was an older man with kind eyes, the kind that had seen enough broken promises to stop being shocked by them. He skimmed the papers and sighed. "She's building a narrative," he said. "If she can prove dependence, financial or emotional, she could make a case." "A case for what?" I asked. My voice cracked in a way that surprised me. "For taking more than you're prepared to lose." I stared at him, words choking in my throat. More than I was prepared to lose? I had already lost her. What else was there? The answer came in fragments over the next days. Friends drifting to her side. Social media posts with vague captions that everyone knew were aimed at me. People I trusted beginning to hesitate when my name came up. In a world where perception often mattered more than truth, her story spread faster than mine ever could. I spent nights pacing the loft, papers scattered across the floor, phone buzzing with unanswered calls. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger, tired, haunted, cornered. For years I had built myself on control, on order, on moving pieces into place. Now the pieces were moving without me. And beneath it all, a question gnawed at me: was she always capable of this? Or had I, in my blind devotion, shaped her into someone who knew exactly where to cut? The loft felt smaller each night, walls closing in, silence heavier. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the collapse of an identity I thought unshakable. For the first time since I was 24, I felt powerless. And that feeling was more terrifying than losing her. The courtroom smelled of paper and nerves. Not the grand kind you see in films, but the weary, fluorescent-lit chambers where lives are untangled in language so precise it strips away the blood of things. Kayla sat across from me. Not the Kayla I knew, the one who laughed under street lamps, who carried sketchbooks full of impossible dreams, but a version sharpened by distance. Her hair was pinned back, her clothes carefully neutral, as though she had been instructed to dress like innocence itself. She didn't look at me. Not once. Her lawyer painted a picture, a man who controlled her, who suffocated her with his resources, who dangled money like a leash. Every word was chosen to reduce me from flesh to archetype, the cold provider, the manipulator, the villain. I wanted to stand, to shout the truth, to remind everyone that I had carried her when she had nothing, that I had given not out of control but out of love. But my lawyer's hand gripped my wrist under the table. "Let him finish," he whispered. When it was my turn, the judge asked me if I wanted to make a statement. My throat tightened, but I nodded. "I never asked for gratitude," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I never asked for repayment. I believed in her dream. I believed in us. If that makes me guilty of anything, then I'll take that. But control?" I shook my head. Control would mean I wanted her small. I wanted her bigger than the world. For a moment, the room was silent. Even the court clerk stopped typing. Kayla shifted in her chair, her eyes flicking up to meet mine for the first time. There was no triumph there, no rage, just something unreadable. Maybe doubt. Maybe shame. Or maybe nothing at all, which was worse. The judge called a recess. We filed out into the hallway, the air thick with whispers and shuffling feet. That's when it happened. Kayla broke from her lawyer, stepped close enough that I could smell her perfume, familiar, devastating. "You should have let me go sooner," she said, her voice low, not meant for the record. Her eyes glistened, but her tone was steel. "You made it too easy to need you. And I hated you for that. It was the knife I didn't see coming, not the betrayal, not the lawsuit, but the confession that loving me had been another kind of prison. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was rewriting history to ease her guilt. But the words stuck. Because in her gaze I saw a truth I couldn't untangle. Maybe she had loved me once, but in the way a drowning person loves the hand that pulls them up, desperate, temporary, unsustainable. The bailiff called us back inside. I turned without another word, walking into the chamber where strangers would decide who I was and what I deserved. But the verdict didn't matter anymore. The real sentence had already been handed down. Kayla was gone. And worse, so was the man I thought I was. Weeks passed before I realized how quiet the loft had become. Not the kind of quiet that soothes, but the kind that presses in from every corner, reminding you what's missing. Kayla's sketchbooks still sat on the shelf, their spines bent, their pages half filled with lives she would never draw. I hadn't moved them. Maybe part of me still needed proof that she had existed here, that I hadn't dreamed the years away. The case dissolved into settlements and signatures. Money exchanged hands, statements were signed, and the lawyers moved on to their next war. On paper, it ended cleanly. In life, nothing did. I tried to return to routine. The warehouse still opened at dawn, shipments still arrived with their familiar smell of cardboard and gasoline. Men still shouted instructions across the floor. But my name carried a different weight now, half respect, half curiosity, as if I had been pulled from myth into scandal. Deals closed, but slower. Clients hesitated. Trust, once given freely, now came with conditions. At night, I'd stand at the window with the skyline stretching out like a promise I no longer believed in. I had built this life from nothing, brick by brick, deal by deal, sacrifice by sacrifice. Yet, for all its solidity, it had collapsed in a single whisper from her lips. You should have let me go sooner. I thought of what that meant. That my devotion had been a cage disguised as generosity. That I had mistaken provision for partnership. That love, when lopsided, rots from the inside until it turns into something unrecognizable. One evening, unable to stand the walls pressing in, I walked the city alone. Past the gallery where we once lingered, past the cafe where she sketched faces of strangers. Everywhere I looked, there were fragments of her. Not the person she had become, but the memory I had loved. And I understood, finally, that grief wasn't just about losing someone, it was about losing the version of yourself that only existed with them. I stopped at a small park bench, the kind we used to sit on when the future still felt like something we could shape together. The city hummed around me, alive, indifferent. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the necklace I had never given her. The pendant caught the streetlight, a small silver brushstroke suspended in the dark. For a long time, I held it there, the last unspent gesture of who we had been. Then, with a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, I set it on the bench and walked away. I didn't look back. The city swallowed the sound of my footsteps, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space. I wasn't free yet. But I was no longer hers. And maybe that was enough to begin again.